Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie, and before I get into the video, there is a GoFundMe link in my description box to a GoFundMe to support Alla and her family whilst she is stuck in Gaza, and if you can check it out and donate, I would really appreciate it. Today's video is about the books that I read in May and also in June. I'm gonna run through quickly what I read in May for a few reasons, and mostly talk about the things that I read in June, which are this lot, although this is maybe misleading because I read one of the plays in this, so it's more like this one. Yeah, the reason why I thought I would just briefly talk about the May books is because I already talked about one of the books I finished in May, because I finished it on the 1st of May and I included that in my April wrap-up, and that was Maman, What Are We Called Now by Jacqueline Mesnil-Amar, which I thought was a really fantastic book, and I'll leave a link to the wrap-up video where I talk about that in the description box and also in the card. I also read Milk Fed by Melissa Broder, which is a book I made a separate video about, which I will also link, where I talk about it and how much I loved that book too. I really liked it. Another book I read was Shubeck Lubeck by Dina Mohammed, I think it's also translated, but I actually can't remember. But I will leave the proper attribution on screen so you can see. And this is like a graphic novel that is about a world where genies and wish magic exists, and I really enjoyed sort of the beginning part, but I honestly found the story I just thought was too long. I think it went on for too long, and so in the end I just was a bit like, okay, we know where this is going, can we get there? But I guess it centers around this man who has these 3 wishes that he's trying to sell at his kiosk, and they are first class wishes because wishes come in 3 levels, and the first class is the strongest, highest, most powerful wishes, and then it gets weaker as you go down. And I also thought there was some really interesting stuff and world building around the wishes and the history of wishes, and the drawings of the wishes themselves I really liked. So yeah, it was a mixed bag. I think it was ultimately disappointing because I just did feel like it kind of dragged on and on, but I'm glad I read it, and it's an enjoyable graphic novel for sure. I just think it could have maybe been edited a bit more. And then the final book I read in May was Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell, which I read with Mari. I didn't do a very good job, but we kind of started it together, and she read me the first chapter, I think. Definitely the opening, and that was really beautiful. And then she finished it way before I finished it. But then I've recorded a video, which I think will go up after this video, of us talking about it. So again, I'm not going to talk about it much here, but I did really enjoy it. It's an account of George Orwell's time in the Spanish Civil War and in Catalonia specifically, and I would really recommend it. I think it's partial, but I don't think it's trying not to be, and I think you do get a nice insight into his own personal feelings, as well as the political, I don't want to say machinations, the political developments, factionalism, difficulties, the internecine drama to some degree, but it's also drama with very high stakes. Anyway, like I said, there's a video about that coming, so with Mari. So I also moved house. Things are definitely not unpacked yet, but obviously some of my books are out on a bookshelf, which is one of the most important things, obviously. So onto my June reading. I was actually really happy with myself over June, because I did a really good job of reading books on my TBR, and I'm hoping that can continue in July. And yeah, I didn't read very much in May, and part of that was because I was really tired and moving, and what I did read, I guess one of them was a graphic novel, and then 2 of them I read as audio, and I guess one of them I mostly just read in April actually, so that doesn't really even count because I finished it on the 1st of May. But this month I was able to focus more on the books on my physical shelves, so that was great. And I already lent this out to someone and they really liked it so much. They didn't finish it, but they bought their own copy to read, which it's just what a great success when you recommend a book to someone. But yeah, so this is My Great Arab Melancholy by Lamia Ziadeh, translated by Emma Ramadan. And this is a book that is very heavily illustrated. I still don't really know how I would describe it, because yeah, I don't know, but anyway, it's got lots of these beautiful and sometimes very like sort of intense and emotive like watercolor paintings and things. And it is about it was published originally I think in French in 2018, so it's obviously not sort of up to date with the current situation that is ever evolving, but at the same time that kind of ever evolving, ever destructive, ever awful and like colonially violent situation that happens in like the Middle East, across sort of the Arab world, but in especially specific places, that's sort of part of it, you know, so it really does fit in, I think, as reading for like us now. And the illustrator is Lebanese, and so she is talking about Lebanon in specific. On the back, it talks about like how it takes the reader on a journey through Beirut, Jerusalem, Cairo and Baghdad, and I just don't think it takes us through a journey in Baghdad. Like Cairo, yeah, to some degree, Jerusalem and Beirut, yeah. I mean, and I also feel like it's just much more focused on like Lebanon, but obviously because the history of Lebanon is like not, you can't just take it out from its you know, neighbors and areas. And yeah, and there's like quite a lot of stuff also about Nasser, who was the prime minister, or was it president, but like the leader of Egypt, but also was this like very incredible and iconic figure in terms of like pan-Arabism and you know, fighting against, like in like Egypt, in Nasser's case specifically, like British imperialism. It sort of winds its way through, and I was thinking more about it as this like expression of the writer and illustrator's experience, because in a way the fact that these are not pictures and they're her drawings makes it even more like it's her perspective and you're inside of it, which I think is, yeah, interesting. I think, you know, it's not an unchallenging book, I guess, for me, reading it as someone who has never been to Lebanon and grew up in the UK and is part of the imperial core, even if I'm against that, you know, there's you can say that all I want, but I do have material benefit from that to an incredible degree. So reading this, I think, really like shoves that the way that I implicitly and sometimes explicitly am centering like Western views, thoughts, and also just like interpretations of events. And so, yeah, I think that makes it really worthwhile to read. I do think there's like two instances where I was just like, I am an anti-imperialist, but I don't really care about Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein. And obviously, I do think that the court that tried him was completely trumped up. I think the invasion of Iraq was just a sickening grab for oil. And I think that, you know, the British and American politicians and journalists who constructed the consent of the public, but also just the policy around that, just absolutely heinous and sickening. But I can't say that I feel sad that Saddam Hussein is dead. I hope that makes sense. I also actually, partially whilst I was reading this, but also sort of afterwards, because it took me a while to get through, listened to this podcast where they talked about the Iraq War, which I would really recommend, because I was quite young when the Iraq War happened. So as a child, I do remember like being at Trafalgar Square once and seeing a protest against the Iraq War and just being absolutely terrified. I was probably like 8 or something, but then I feel like I never really returned to it to learn more about it than just to be like, well, I was alive when it happened. But anyway, so yeah, I've been listening to this podcast too, and I would recommend that. It's called Blowback. It is by two men, and they are very like, you do kind of just have to let them be like men about some stuff, and they also, I don't think that they adequately like content one for some of the content, especially there's one particular episode where there is really intense discussion of torture, and there's no warning for that, and I do think that there should be for many reasons, but I just think like if you're going to talk about in-depth stuff about torture, then you should probably say that that's what you're going to do. Anyway, but that's not about this book. I did read it like quite fast and a while ago now, so that's also why I guess it's not as like in the forefront of my mind. But yeah, no, I would really recommend this. And obviously, as it's like kind of nice as a sort of travel log, because it's by someone who is from there, as opposed to, but it's also still like this travel and journey, and learn about the histories and the kind of religious meanings of these places. Yeah, I think that's really nice and refreshing. So I would really recommend this for sure. And I'm really glad that I read it. And I actually have plans to lend it to somebody else. So hopefully it will be as successful with them as the first person. The next book I read was The Sapling Cage by Margaret Killjoy, which is a YA novel. It's a fantasy novel about Laurel, who is a trans girl and she really wants to be a witch. I mean, at the beginning, she isn't really out, but she also is sort of out. I would say there's a sort of like in-out boundary that is constantly kind of shifting. But basically, like, you can't be, like, only girls become witches, but she really wants to become a witch. And her friend has been promised to the witches. It's set in this kind of, like, pseudo-medievally kind of place. There's, like, knights and witches and things like that. And so, yeah, she agrees to take the place of this friend who's been promised to the witches. And so goes, like, undercover as a girl to be part of the witches. But obviously she is a girl. But it's, you know, like, she is dealing with not being out as like a trans girl. And yeah, I thought it was really sweet. Like, I think Laurel is a really lovely character. There is something quite simple about it, but I also think that's fine, you know. Yeah, I mean, I love reading about witches, so that was also fun. I think this is also kind of like a story of like trans feminine wish fulfillment to some degree, and you know, I think that's very sweet too. And I do feel like maybe people who are like interested in reading like the younger age of YA, maybe like, I don't know, up to the age of 15 or something, 14 maybe, this could be like a really wonderful book to give someone who is trans and who's like trying to work it out for themselves and is thinking about, you know, ways of being in the world. And yeah, I think you can also really tell it's a Margaret Killjoy novel in terms of how the sort of social relationships between people and like the ethical behaviors of some of the characters are like framed. And so I would definitely recommend it, but I also kind of feel like I don't think this has universal appeal, because you do have to be up for reading like a YA novel that is fairly like simple. But yeah, it also did make me start to think about what I would put on a kind of like alternative YA like list. Elatsue would also maybe fit with that, and I was thinking actually, yeah, these two kind of work quite well together, I feel like. And they are both also dealing with like sort of the fantastical, although Elatsue in like a different way. Anyway, the next thing that I read was The Rover by Aphra Behn, which is a play. I like read and watched it simultaneously, which is why I would count it as read. Whereas I guess if I watched a play, I wouldn't count it as like read in a time period, even if I would say, oh, I know that play, if somebody later asked me. Does that make sense? Like, I did physically read a bunch of it, even if I also was watching a production of it. I read this because I'm trying to read the books on my shelves, I guess, and this was like one of them. I have been getting really into like early modern drama. I guess this is kind of later for that because it's from the it's like 1670, I think, or 1670s or something, which is like, you know, restoration drama, as opposed to like more Shakespearean drama and like Jacobean Elizabethan stuff, which I guess is where I've more like read from already and like, mostly because I like Shakespeare, which is like a fact about myself that I forget regularly, and then I'm reminded that I actually do really love Shakespeare. And that's been happening recently, you know. It is also because, like I've said before, I just love these like new Mermaids like drama editions. I just think they're so like fun packaged, and also they are like useful, and I like how they also have like the frontispiece or whatever you would call that for the plays that they have in here, for like their first printing, and stuff like that. But like the play itself I didn't like at all, and I don't really want to talk about it. It made me like really uneasy, but like obviously I think that's somewhat the point, but then also not so much the point. So yeah, I didn't like that. But I am interested in Aphra Behn, who is a woman writer. She's also kind of credited with, I think some people call it like the first novel, but I don't know that it is. But yeah, she also wrote Oronooko. Yeah, so I would like to read that. I'd like to read more of her work. I am also interested in her as a figure because I think she's quite mysterious and was like a spy and stuff like that, so interesting stuff, but didn't like that play, and I don't think I'll like her plays really. I also kind of think that restoration drama is not really for me. But you know, I could be wrong. I don't have that much experience with it. But in terms of how it treats like violence and relationships between men and women, I don't think I like it all. And obviously some like it, you know, you can find that interesting, but like even if I sort of do, I also don't really want to talk about it because it means I have to think way too much about violence, and I don't want that. Yeah. The next thing I read was The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. Of course I'm being like fashionably out of step with the Hardy read-along that Jen the Librarian is hosting, because whilst everybody was reading Desperate Remedies, his first novel, I was reading this, which is like, I don't know, his sixth. I have no idea if that's right, but it's later. But yeah, I think I would ultimately give this 4 stars. I there were points when I thought I was gonna like love it, But in the end, yeah, I didn't. I mean, I thought it was really good and I really enjoyed the twists of it. I also at points really just didn't know what was going to happen, which I think sometimes is like really nice to experience with a book, because especially older books, you can just be a bit like, okay, so we know that this is where the plot's going to head out. But then sometimes I think it's also because the way that people talk about this novel is they talk about the inciting incident so much that the rest of the plot is almost like lost, because it begins with a man who sells his wife at market to another man. And obviously that's like a big deal. And yeah, like, you know, thinking about this novel as actually recording the aftermath of that, I think changes the story a bit, because it happens in the first chapter. Like, it's, well, is that true? It could be the second chapter, but it's really right at the beginning. And then yeah, it is about what are the consequences of that, but it's like 20 years after it happened, maybe 18, or maybe slightly less than that, let's see. Well, I don't know, it must be, yeah, 15, 20 years after that. There's a child in this and her age vaguely did confuse me, so yeah, the timing around it didn't make that much sense to me. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I did also think this was really fascinating. There's this like instance of a skimity ride, I think is what it was called, which I'd never heard of, but it's like an awful folk practice of like misogyny, and kind of also like disciplining communities and especially like unruly women. But that was, you know, like interesting to learn about. I just, yeah, I think, like, to be honest, I thought I would have more to say and more feelings about it, and ultimately I don't think I do. I did think it was a really excellent character analysis, like Michael Henchard, who sells his wife. I think as a study of his character, it's kind of brilliant, and like his both development and lack of development, I did find quite like interesting, and I thought was really well done, or at least, yeah, I thought it was pretty fascinating. And I thought he was kind of awful, but at the same time he was like complex enough to not be completely heinous. And I said that like twice now, haven't I? But yeah, I just thought he was like quite interesting. Yeah, I think I did maybe have like too high expectations for this, because I do really like Thomas Hardy, or like what I've read of him before, but at the same time I don't think I will like all of his work and love it. And also I have read something by him that I didn't think was that great too, so maybe I should have thought about that too. But obviously this is just quite like an iconic book too, because of what it starts as being about. So, and yeah, I mean, like, wife selling is like a thing that did happen, but not especially commonly in the past. So yes, there's that. Okay, and like I said, I've been getting into early modern drama, and so I did like a combined reading and watching instance too, but like I said, because I did actually read this, even if not every single word, I would count it as being read. But I read The Spanish Tragedy by Thomas Kidd. Here we go. The Spanish Tragedy, or Hieronymo is Mad Again, containing the lamentable end of Don Horatio and Belle Imperia, with the pitiful death of Hieronymo, as it hath of late been diverse times acted. And yeah, this printed like script is from 1615. I don't remember when it was originally performed. I think the 1590s, because it's a really like influential play. I have also been listening to some of the like public facing work that Emma Smith, who is a professor of like Shakespeare and also early modern drama, and I honestly love her. I think she's so fantastic. But she has like a bunch of her lectures, but they are recorded and online, so I'll leave a link to some of those, because she did like a series called like Not Shakespeare, which was about Elizabethan and Jacobean popular culture, or like popular theatre, which included the Spanish Tragedy. It also included, she has lectures on the Spanish Tragedy, the Vengeance Tragedy, 'Tis Pity She's a Whore, Not the White Devil, which is the fourth in this. I have already sort of read and seen 'Tis Pity She's a Whore. Actually, I don't know that I've seen it, but I think I've read chunks of it like a while ago, and I did also decide, having listened to her lecture about the Revenge's Tragedy, I'm not going to read that. I'm going to save myself. The Spanish Tragedy is like really influential in terms of like Hamlet, so that's also really interesting. Obviously, one of the things that is quite hard to do when you are engaging with non-Shakespearean plays and things from his era, or like around, is to like compare them with Shakespeare and be like, oh yeah, and Shakespeare's so much better. Because obviously I think that can create this like false sense of, I don't know, like linearity and like progress, when obviously when you're like part of a form of writing or art or creating or whatever, it goes through various stages of like development, stasis, parody, like all of this stuff. I think we can be quite snooty about like, well, of course this was very popular, but it's not like Shakespeare, which we now appreciate so much better than the original audiences did because we're so clever. When, you know, this play was really, really popular. Like, it was performed loads of times, and it's still not a very high number of times, but because of the way that like the play, like theatre world, needed a lot of new material. Like, I think a play would maybe, if it was popular, get played like 10 times or something, whereas the Spanish tragedy was like in its 30s, which in comparison is like very big. And you know, I obviously don't think, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be making connections between Shakespeare and these other writers. I think we obviously should, and obviously one of the reasons why some of that kind of like derision about like other non-Shakespeare works is that a lot of these plays were written collaboratively, and Shakespeare collaborated with some of these playwrights. It starts to feel very like we just have to desperately preserve the genius of Shakespeare and say that he's singular and alone, when he was working in this culture and community of playwrights, actors, people who took old plays and like rejigged them. Sometimes people would be paid to like rewrite whole plays, like set different people. And anyway, so yeah, I've been just really enjoying like thinking about this, learning about it more, going back over stuff that I guess I already sort of knew, but like hadn't thought about for a long time. And I will definitely leave a link to Emma Smith's series. She does also have one about Shakespeare specifically, which I'd also recommend. It's just called Approaching Shakespeare. So yeah, I'll leave a link to both of those too. I did also watch The Duchess of Malfi this month, but because I didn't really read the play text as I was watching it, I didn't count it as being read. But yeah. Finally, the last book to talk about is The High House. This is really so eclectic, I feel. But that's fun. So this is, The High House by Jessie Greengrass, which is actually a book from my summer TBR, so great to have made progress with that. And this is quite like a slight book, like there's not really very much on the page, and there's lots of just like sections that are pretty short. So it reads pretty fast, and I'm really not sure how I feel about it. I definitely liked it less than Sight, which is Jessie Greengrass's first book and what drew me to pick this up, because I loved that so much. But I think there is something in this, and I think you can also tell some of the kind of preoccupations of Sight, which is a lot about pregnancy, mothering, that kind of thing, are obviously in this, and like what it means to like mother people, what it means to need care, what it means to be a child, how it is to care for a child and then come to love a child, or like how that might happen. It's all in here, but at the same time, yeah, the focus is on, I mean, it depends what you think is happening in the next few years, but in a potentially near or potentially slightly further away future. This was described as science fiction, but I don't think it is that at all. It's simply like set in a slightly further forward world where even more intensive change is happening as a result of climate change. So it's definitely a book that really, really deeply engages with what we are doing, how we're not doing enough, and I guess it really depends on what you think about our current world now, and if we've sort of already reached the point where this book is sort of coming out of as like a sort of meditation on like what to do in terms of continuing to live or trying to live, and like who to save and how to save people, and if it's possible to save anyone, 3 people, what's it possible to do, you know? Because yeah, this focuses on 3 people whose perspective we read from, and they're like they're kind of in a created / constructed family, but basically 2 of them are kind of related and they have the same dad. And then like the younger child, Paulie, his mum is this like famous sort of academic climate campaigner and is on all of these panels, and she goes around the world and is talking, but she also had this child, which is, I think, quite like in a way it seems to sort of go against a lot of the things she's been saying about the fact that there isn't really hope, but then she had this baby, but then she sort of also has to live with that as something that she's done. And there are some really beautiful, like I did cry, especially right at the end, but there are some really beautiful parts about, I don't know, loving, trying to mother in the face of potentially not surviving. But yeah, at the same time, I think from my own political perspective, I feel like I do think we need to talk about the grief that we feel about climate change, about collapse. But I also don't know that I believe that this kind of thing is particularly good in terms of like our political perspective. I think if we're like, oh, we should just give up, we can't do anything, we can't save other people, then like that is a prophecy that we can easily fulfill. But if we are like, no, there's things to fight for, we obviously can't go to a new planet that has none of these problems, but we do need to take seriously that we can mitigate harm. You know, I think if you think about climate change from a harm reductionist position, there's many things we can do, and we can make the future more livable than in our like sort of imaginary, in our anxiety. I guess I just think there's like a balance we need to find there. And I do also feel like it's a really privileged position to kind of be like, oh, it's going to be a dystopia in the future. It's a dystopia now, and we have to reckon with that, and we have to figure out how we can fight and live for and with each other in the future. And I don't think that's easy. I don't know that I'm doing that very well. But I think making space for that politically, fictionally, in our imaginations is one of the ways to continue to be committed to this planet right now, and to, you know, we nobody knows the future. Like, things could be not as much of a disaster as they are. The future is not written in stone, and that's great, and obviously that's absolutely terrifying. But, you know, we have freedom right now to do lots of things, and we also have less and less freedoms. I understand that as well. Anyway, yeah. I guess I will leave it there. I hope that made sense. Definitely let me know if you read any of the things that I mentioned. If you have particular early modern plays you think I should read, or if you read The High House and you have any thoughts on it. Yeah, also I wanted to say the Sapling Cage got nominated for the Ursula K. Le Guin prize. It got like shortlisted for it, I mean. So that's nice, and it means I've read something on the shortlist. I think I have read at least one thing from it every year except from last year. So I'm looking for the book that won, and hopefully I'll get to read that at some point, because it does seem kind of cool. Hi, just popping back because I realised I didn't say something that I've been meaning to say in every video I've made and failed. In celebration of getting to 1,000 subscribers, I thought it would be fun maybe to try and do like a Q&A video. So I do have like a community post that I made about this when I remembered, and that was what I was trying to do. So I'll leave a link to that, and you can put questions in it there, like both about books and non-book related, but also you can just comment on this video with your question. Yeah, we'll see if it works, but hopefully it'll be fun. I hope that you're having a good day when you watch this, and yeah, I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye.